Good afternoon and welcome to the ISM Rochester Lunch and Learn webinar series. Our topic for today's discussion is expectations in international trade. Hot topic, of course, it's out there. So glad to bring Tom Cook back to speak to our chapter and to all of our guests as well. Please be sure to ask questions using the chat or the Q&A area. Tom most likely will answer following the presentation. If we can interrupt in the middle, we will. I do want to give a little bit about Tom's background. He is the managing director of Blue Tiger International, an international business consultancy advising on supply chain management, trade compliance, purchasing, trade and disruption management, global business, and logistics. Tom was the former CEO of American River International in New York and Apex Global Logistics Supply Chain Operation in LA. Tom has over 35 years experience in assisting companies all over the world, managing their import and export operations. He is a member of the New York District Export Council and serves on the board of directors of the National Association of District Export Councils. Tom is also the director of the National Institute of World Trade. It is an educational and training organization based in New York. Both Blue Tiger International and the National Institute of World Trade are strategic partners for the Department of Commerce. I will now turn the program over to Tom.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see and meet everyone once again from the world of Rochester. And I know some other people have been invited in from some other areas. So I run a company called Blue Tiger International. We're supply chain management consultants. We help companies in the vertical of risk and spend and tariff management. And obviously, tariff management is a hot subject, and it'll be part of our conversation that we have today. At any point in time, if you have a question, just raise your hand, put the question in the box, and Kathy will manage the flow into me. But you're welcome to ask as we go along here. You're welcome to ask questions. You're welcome to make comments, and you're certainly welcome to challenge any of the things that I put out there. So the big issues that we're going to cover as of May 4th, because as we all know, we're on a roller coaster of change that's happening almost every day in the supply chain, particularly with the executive orders coming out of the Trump administration. So we're going to talk a lot about the Trump tariffs. We're going to talk about the Houthis in Yemen, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, AI and global supply chain and supply chain risk management. So the whole subject of tariffs, which obviously is a very hot topic right now, mainly because of all the executive orders that Trump has put out there, is generally designed for the purpose of bringing revenue into a country's treasury. As a point of reference, when the Americas was formed, the United States, in 1789, the first government agency that was formed after the Constitutional Convention was U.S. Customs. The fledgling country needed money, so the best way to collect it immediately was to put officers at the border, and importers had to pay a duty to the U.S. government. And appreciate that almost every country around the world has some system of revenue generation in the form of duty, tariffs, and a lot of times value-added taxes. It's also designed to control trade protectionism. In the United States, we have over 100 commodities that are protected. An example would be shoes, certain cars, certain wood products, particularly like furniture, certain agricultural products and things like that are protected, and they use tariffs and surcharges to help control the flow of foreign goods that would meet head-on competition against U.S. suppliers. And as we all know, it can also be used as the negotiation strategy, which is what Trump is doing, in order for him to obtain other results in influencing behavior and policy on the part of other countries around the world. So if you try to get your head around this subject, which we are actually paid to by some of our larger clients, is to advise them and to give them guidance on how to interpret and try to understand so they can plan out in the future what things are coming out of the Trump administration. So when we talk about China, Trump believes that China is the greatest threat to the US, not only from an economic standpoint, from also a military standpoint. And he's boxing China in and making it almost impossible for them to sell to the United States. So you asked this question why. Obviously, one of them that we're all very familiar with is that he's looking to move a certain amount of manufacturing out of China and back here into the United States, particularly in critical areas. But also, what he wants to do is influence China's behavior. He wants them to disassociate with North Korea, with Russia and Iran, wants them to stop tugging and bringing Taiwan back into the Chinese family. He wants them out of the South China Sea and the conflicts that they have with our ally, the Philippines. And he's concerned about their interference in North Africa and in Latin America, where they're showing up both from a military and economic standpoint. So he's hammering them not only to obtain what we call fair and reciprocal trade with China, but also for the fact that he wants to influence their behavior and how they handle themselves politically and economically with the world. With the rest of the world, he wants trade balances, which means that he wants them to increase their purchasing from the United States, where we have products and services to sell. And he wants fair and reciprocal tariffs, meaning that if the United States has a 4.5% duty rate on goods coming out of the UK, then he wants to have a 4.5% duty rate on goods coming from the United States to around the world. The average duty rate in the United States for all products from all countries is around 4 to 4.5%. Around the world, the average duty rate on US products going in is in the neighborhood of 8 to 9%. It's almost twice as much. Okay. And a perfect example to get your head around this a little bit is that if BMW was to sell a car that was manufactured in Germany into the United States, when it crossed the border, they would pay a 2.5% duty rate. If Chevrolet in Detroit tried to sell a car in Germany, they would pay a 17.5% duty rate. So you can see the imbalance in that trade relationship. In the United States here, we see BMWs everywhere we go. If you go to Germany, which I've been to several times, there are not too many Chevrolets driving around. So he wants the markets open around the world to US products. And I think almost anybody, reasonable mindset would agree that that's something that those are good goals to get. I think where most of us take exception, particularly of those of us in the supply chain, we get concerned on Trump's methodology at the speed he's going and the severity that he's going. It's not given really enough time for us to adjust. So I make the point that I tend to agree with most of the policy decisions, but I disagree with the methodologies on how he wants to get to the goals that he has out there. If you think about all the tariffs that he's put out, notice also that he's also backpedaling on a significant amount of them. And part of that is the way that he negotiates, where he really hammers somebody up front and then he pulls back and make them feel a little bit better because he's reduced the severity of what he has put forth. If you have an opportunity, as an interesting read, over 30 years ago, he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. It's been up a number of times. I've read it actually when it first came out in the middle 1990s, as well as two other times, the last time being about 2 years ago. He believes that if you're negotiating with a party on the other side of the table, as he writes in his book, he says you've got to create a disruptive event. You got to make that person feel somewhat uncomfortable, creating a certain degree of chaos in order to get advantage in the negotiation. Now, most of us, particularly those of us in purchasing and supply chain, would never really negotiate that way. We try to build relationships. We try to create bridges and commonalities between us and the person on the other side of the table. Trump doesn't negotiate that way. Okay. He negotiates by hammering and then stepping back. So you have all this chaos, disruption, and uncertainty, which are the consequences. And I don't believe the administration is really thinking about the upstream and downstream impacts of all the decisions that he's making and those that are coming out in executive order. So if you ask the question, is there substance to this madness? At the end of the day, you've got to look at it somewhat pragmatically, try to take the emotion out of the equation, is that as of last Friday, more than 100 countries around the world have already come to Washington and put them on notice that they are acquiescing to the president's demands and are offering reciprocal tariffs. And more than half of those countries are actually offering 0% tariffs as long as the United States puts 0% on goods coming from their countries. And that's one of the things that Trump is actually striving for, is where the fair and reciprocal tariffs not are at 4, 5, 6, 7%, but come down to zero, which would really open up the world markets to US products and services all over the place. So if more than 100 countries have come to the table, the good news is, which is the same as the bad news, is that Trump's strategy is working to some extent. The bad news is that his strategy is working to some extent because it emboldens him more to be on this aggressive pattern, and this aggressive not only in terms of the extent, but also the timeliness of responsiveness that we can offer to respond to this. So in this creating the chaos, disruption, uncertainty, there's a tremendous amount of backpedaling that's going on. He comes out hard and then softening, and this is a negotiation strategy. And we make the point to everybody that while you have to plan aggressively for a worst case scenario, you really need to be very patient in execution because so many things have already circled itself from what he said back in late February and early March to here we are in early May. Things have turned around pretty much 180 degrees in certain areas. And lastly, I mentioned to you is that China was not publicly negotiating with the Trump administration, but things have changed pretty dramatically in the last 7 days, mainly because somewhere around the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of POs coming out of the United States into China have been canceled. Bookings for ocean and air freight for April, May, and June are down in the neighborhood of 60 to 70%. Factories are closing and unemployment is going past 16% in China. So that pressure is now on the administration in Beijing, and we're starting to see glinters of that negotiation process taking place, which actually is a good thing, because at the end of the day, while we want to kind of have a risk management strategy of moving away from China, we don't have to move away 100%. We can risk manage by diversifying a certain percentage of our sourcing portfolio to other countries and places around the world, in some cases back here to the United States. I was reading an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal about the fact that a lot of US manufacturers have really seen a significant uptick in their businesses since all this aggressive action, which is one of the downstream impacts that Trump was hoping for. So some of the things to think about relative to specifics is that Trump has identified and targeted certain industries, generally industrial goods, aviation products, automotive products, pharma, medical, energy, and transportation are all in his sights. He's also, while he's going after the whole world, he has a list of targeted countries, starting with Canada and Mexico. You might ask the question, why are we going after two countries which border us on the north and the south? We have a very strategic relationship with them. We have the world's largest trade agreement, the USMCA, previously NAFTA, with those countries. But the truth be bare is that while Mexico and Canada can sell any product or service into the United States, we're restricted, meaning the United States is restricted on what we can sell into Canada and Mexico. They have all kinds of restraining agreements in place, quotas, and surcharges on goods coming from the United States, making it uncompetitive for US products and services. Just in the banking industry, as an example, if you go down Park Avenue in New York City, you could see 5 or 6 Canadian banks having offices here. You go down to the same street in Toronto, Canada, and you don't see any US banks because US banks are not allowed to operate in Canada. So he wants to see agreements be reached where there's fair and balanced trade with Canada or Mexico. He also wants them to up their responsibilities at the border. And most of us know already that he's been very successful in getting both Canada and Mexico to bring more resources to the border, which is one of the highlights of his administration. He's really impacted on both borders the extent of illegal aliens and illegal drugs coming into the United States. He's gone after the EU, and the whole block of EU is one of those areas of the world, regions that have offered as a block of countries, okay, the 0% offer to Trump, where everything going into the EU would be at a 0% duty rate, and the EU countries selling to the United States would be at a 0%. China coming to the table, Japan, Ireland, South Korea, Switzerland, Malaysia, India. We're expecting to hear any day now where a very specific trade agreement has been arranged with Italy. Thailand, Vietnam, Germany, and Taiwan are all other countries that are negotiating pretty aggressively to make sure that that they don't lose out. And always appreciate that one of the strengths that Trump negotiates off is that the population of the United States represents 5% of the world population, but represents 70% of the consumer spend. So every country in the world wants to sell their products and services into the United States. And that's part of the leverage that Trump has in these negotiations. However, we need to be concerned with, as these new tariff regulations come out through executive orders, we have to be very sensitive to regulations and appreciate the fact that there's not only U.S. Customs that's involved in import activity, but we have other agencies such as Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, Treasury, State, Department of Defense, the Federal Maritime Commission, and plus, depending upon the nature of what business we're in, we have specific government agencies that control the nature of our product, such as the FDA, the USDA, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the CDC. There's about 28 other agencies that impact imports that come into the United States. Keep in mind that CBP locally is the gatekeeper for adherence to old and new regulations, and for all other government agencies because they have the manpower at the border. But appreciate that when Trump came into office, he made a decision to reduce the size of the federal government. So he offered all kinds of early retirement packages, created a significant amount of furloughs, significant amount of terminations, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 300 to 400,000 people in Washington related to federal jobs are now not unemployed. So there's a significant manpower deficiency in a number of government agencies. My business works very heavily with the Department of Commerce, and their senior management staff was depleted by 85% by the end of March. Executive orders that come out have a high degree of ambiguity in them. He's not wording them correctly, so it's taken us as much as a week to 2 weeks after they're issued to meet with Customs and try to figure out what the interpretation is. Custom has a responsibility to post these executive orders to the Federal Register, so they have to discern exactly what the intent of the White House was. So attorneys in Customs are talking to the attorneys in the White House to figure out what the intent was so they can come up with that wording. So there's sometimes as much as a 10-day lag between when these executive orders come out and professionals like our company in supply chain are able to really guide companies on how to manage their supply chain within those guidelines. We're seeing that the origin of the goods is highly questioned now because a lot of companies are rerouting freight through other countries. Related parties will be intensely scrutinized. So if you're a subsidiary of a foreign company, if you're a U.S. company that has foreign operations overseas, that by itself is going to create concern with U.S. Customs, and appreciate that all customs clearances are done electronically so they can create algorithms to look for situations where there's related parties in a transaction. And the negotiations and the information flow is ongoing, so there will be a lot of backpedaling, a lot of changes made to all the things that are come out over the last 60 days. Specific areas of concern is the routing of freight, where people are now routing the freight through a third-party country and then stating the goods are coming from that country. We both handle proactive activity, keeping companies out of trouble, and also reactive once they get into trouble. So we're seeing a huge amount, an increase of incidences where Customs has caught companies, and the latest one was last week, where a company that was based in Columbus, Ohio, routed freight from China to Toronto, and in Toronto repacked the goods and then shipped them from Canada into the United States, saying they were now made in Canada. A random inspection by Customs while it was crossing the border opened up one of the boxes and saw that it was actually made in China. So you can appreciate that this company has a significant problem on its plate now, particularly if customs finds that it was willful and egregious and intentional. Valuation, we're seeing a lot of companies lowering their values on commercial invoices, not legitimately, but illegitimately to produce a lower duty rate. Transfer pricing between related parties becomes a much more concerning issue. Using the wrong HTS number for the purpose of getting a lower duty rate and showing the wrong country as the country of origin on the documentation. These are areas that are more frequently being used by companies to try to avert all these new tariff regulations that are coming out. So organizations like ISM are places that we could turn to for resources and helping us navigate these responsibilities. Kathy does a great job at bringing webinars and information available to the members that are timely and comprehensively cover the concerns that are of that period of time. Local custom house brokers, freight forwarders, and 3PLs are also an excellent source. Various government agencies like U.S. Customs and the Department of Commerce have various outreach initiatives. And webinar events like this and ones on site, various trade association meetings are important to pay attention to. You never know what pieces of tidbit that you pick up that might be valuable to you when you bring it back to the office. Reading key media on a regular basis, the Wall Street Journal, Journal of Commerce, American Shipper are all three great resources that we use on a daily basis in our team. And lastly is LinkedIn. We're finding that LinkedIn, if you tie into a number of good consulting companies and law firms that specialize in international trade and supply chain, that they are actually pretty good information flows. You always have to discern what is reality versus what is maybe an opinion or maybe something that's being pulled out of an extrapolation circumstance. But I find that LinkedIn today is actually very valuable if you focus on the right places. And lastly, there are consultants like our company and trade attorneys that specialize in international and supply chain. Some other things to think about that we're seeing an uptick with U.S. Customs is their concern on imports where we assist. If we assist the supplier overseas to manufacture the product by sharing patents, trademarks, by sharing equipment, tools, dies, machinery, equipment, and wherewithal, that could be considered an assist, which means it's an increased value that has to be added on to the commercial invoice when the goods come through the border. Customs has a particular formula on how to figure out what that assist valuation should be. They're looking at documentation to make sure that we have the ISF filings, the commercial invoices, the packing list, quality control certificates, the bills of lading, all those documents that are required to make sure that we're keeping them. And always remember that record keeping for imports and exports is for 5 years. Valuation, making sure that we have a valuation that relates to the wholesale market pricing of the goods that pass through the border. If we need a license and permits, that's clearly identified and available for customs to look at when the goods come through the border. Packing, marking, and labeling is another whole requirement, particularly when we import in the United States and when we export overseas, the packing, marking, and labeling requirements of the country that we're shipping to. Forced labor issues, particularly out of China and North Africa, are still a major issue where forced labor is used in the supply chain. And as of about a month ago, Customs is up to close to over $3 billion worth of seizures at the port, various ports, where they suspect that forced labor was used in the supply chain. And appreciate that they dip down not only from your primary supplier, but your suppliers, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So you got to go down the line a little bit further in your due diligence process. Due diligence, reasonable care, and supervision are all kinds of things that we have to be making sure that we're paying attention to. The concept of controlled supervision relates to that if we use freight forwarders and custom house brokers, that in fact we are supervising and controlling their responsibilities to make sure they're doing things correctly. And proactive engagement is attending events like this. In a lot of audits, I've seen customs ask the question, how are you keeping abreast of the changes that are happening in the world today? And attending an event like this is an example of the type of thing that they want to see and how answered. So, in kind of summary of some of these things to think about is the war in Ukraine. Trump, extolled that he was going to resolve this problem within a few days of taking office, and he's realizing how difficult the problem is because here we are past 100 days, and the fighting is still pretty heavy. Um, he is trying very hard, as we can all tell from paying attention to the media, but unfortunately, the war is still going on. And I think not only the United States, but also Europe is getting a little bit tired of the fact that this is just at a standstill, and the aggressive efforts of Russia have not proven valuable for them, and the efforts of Ukraine have just held the Russians. There's actually only miles between the difference from 2 years ago to today of what the Russians have succeeded, and the Ukrainians have been able to hold back. The Hamas Israel issue is kind of settling out, even though there's still aggressive actions on both parties. Lately, the last communication is that Israel intends to take over all of Gaza from an administrative standpoint and militarily to make sure that it doesn't become a hotbed for Hamas to set up again. The Panama Canal, most of those issues have been settled. It's unlikely that the United States is going to be involved with running the canal. They wanted to have a greater degree of influence, which they've been successful since Trump has come into office. Canada is the 51st state, is rhetoric from Trump. It's not a reality. The Canadian people do not have any taste at all for becoming part of the United States. The acquisition of Greenland, however, is a real initiative on the part of the administration. They're working hard with the people of Greenland and the administration in Denmark to actually, if not take it over, have certain rights to it, particularly where we can mine the minerals and the energy, as well as deploy certain aspects of the military for protection of the Western Hemisphere. Great Britain, Japan, and India are three countries that the United States is successfully negotiating trade agreements with. The extent of those agreements, we're waiting for the release of that, but we expect India to come out within the next few days, and by the end of the month, news about Great Britain and Japan. The president has also extolled that he wants to start assessing up to $1 million in port fees for Chinese flag vessels when they arrive at U.S. ports, and any flag vessel, if the vessel was made in China, these fees would be dispersed to the carrier. And as we can all appreciate, the carrier is going to turn around and transfer that back to the person paying for the freight, which is typically the importer. So he hasn't released that executive order. He just keeps threatening it, but eventually we believe that something will come out. China, as I mentioned earlier, is being boxed in, but is now starting to negotiate, mostly out of the fact that they're under tremendous pressure to do that. Fair and reciprocal tariffs, we are picking a date of May 20th, that will all be pretty much resolved on the basis that most countries, and particularly the ones that we have as larger trading relationships, have all acquiesced to what Trump is requesting, and in many cases are offering these 0% deals, which is a great thing. In the area of de minimis, which is e-commerce business, shipments under $800 of value, we know that Trump now has effectively stopped China from getting the benefit of de minimis rules. So this has impacted large companies like Amazon itself, Alibaba, Temu, and Shine, which all have sent tremendous amounts of product into the United States at a very, very low cost. And that is over now. I work with a number of these companies, and a lot of them now are setting up standard warehousing and distribution systems in the United States, similar to what Amazon has done as well. So we'll see how successful they are when they go to a more traditional model. Export controls, particularly to countries like Russia and China, are becoming much more stricter and stringent. The ability to get export license to some of these countries is becoming almost impossible. Steel and aluminum, he's put a 25% surcharge on that, but also what he calls derivatives. which means if steel and aluminum are in the manufacturing part of the component, then that's where the 25% is applied. A lot of companies have significantly increased their safety stock, which is starting to stress the warehousing because most larger companies only have a certain amount of warehousing, so they outsource it to third parties, and that is slowly increasing. By the end of COVID, about 98% of all the warehousing space in the United States was used, leaving only about 2%. But 2 years after COVID, that kind of got relaxed and warehouses got to the normal 75 to 80% capacity. But since Trump has come into office, that capacity is starting to diminish very quickly. So the ability to get warehousing is becoming a little bit more difficult. And also the costing is going up because it's always a supply and demand issue. When they're in great demand, their pricing increases. So when we look at tariffs, we look at the origin of the goods, the HTS number, the harmonized tariff number, and a bar graph where the two lines intersect, that's the duty rate. That system is used in most countries, but interpretations of the rules might vary from country to country. So when we think about this in tariff mitigation, if we can change the HTS or the origin, if we can change the supply chain steps or the manufacturing process, you can impact the application of tariffs and with the guideline that you're looking to try to reduce them. So what we suggest every company really do is create an assessment process that looks at landed costs. And landed cost is determined by 5 pillars in our model: the acquisition cost of the merchandise, the freight to move it from point A to point B, the customs clearance process, which has all kinds of fees attached to it, duties and taxes, which are assessed by the government for the goods coming in, which are determined by where it is and what it is, okay, where it's from and what it is. And last mile, meaning that we generally bring goods into a warehousing or distribution facility, and then we ship it to our customers for final delivery. So when we look at those silos, we've created as many as 19 solutions, and we've been kind of cornered now with a number of other companies to become even more creative. And we're up to about 23 solutions now that we have that are available. So I'm going to go through these very quickly just by title, but I'm going to look at some examples and case studies just to give you an idea of how this whole thing works. But the two top ones are becoming some of the more common areas of tariff mitigation that provides really more immediate relief. If we move our goods into foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses, it gives us the immediate relief because we're not obligated to pay duty until the goods come out. And in a bonded warehouse, we can keep goods in there for 5 years, and in a foreign trade zone, we can keep it in for an unlimited amount of time. Okay. However, there are restrictions for foreign trade zones of when the goods come out in terms of when the duty is applicable. If the goods come from China and they go into a foreign trade zone, they have to come into the foreign trade zone at a duty rate, which will be the same as when it comes out. So whatever the duty rate is when it enters, if the duty rate changes 3 months later and it comes out, it'll be the duty rate of when it entered. As compared to bonded, it's only the duty rate when it exits the facility that's applicable. So right now for Chinese goods, the bonded facility actually offers a little bit better benefit. But there are other benefits to foreign trade zone because in a bonded warehouse, you can't materially change the product. If it comes in as a widget, it's got to go out as a widget. But in foreign trade zones, we could do manufacturing and assembly where we bring in parts and components and raw materials and change it into a finished product. Customs in an FTZ gives us the ability to use the duty rate of the raw materials and components as compared to the finished product, whichever gives us the better advantage. Tariff engineering is the legitimate manipulation of a product to change its HTS number in order to get a lower duty rate. The example there would be if I add a waterproofing to a fabric such as Gore-Tex, I can either eliminate the duty or significantly lower the duty applicable to that new HTS number. Drawback is a program in which we pay duties to customs when goods are imported, but if those goods are exported, we can go back to customs to get back 99% of the duty that was paid when it was imported. Freight consolidation is moving your freight into one carrier or just one or two carriers so that you can take advantage of purchasing power with one entity. Intensive operations training and resources, programs like this and attending those things gives you information that you can take back to your office for use. Direct shipping, we're doing a lot of direct shipping now out of China. We have 9 stations there to make that happen. The example or the scenario we give is you go to a US warehouse and they're distributing to their end customers and you say, where did this come from? And they go, well, we brought in 4 container loads coming in from China and the freight's sitting in this warehouse. And we say, what value are you adding to it in this warehouse? And they say, nothing. We just do pick and pack to make actual shipment orders out, but we don't add any value to the product. Well, you could shift your back room to China and deliver directly from there to your customer, and you could have your name on all the material, on all the paperwork and so forth, that it shows the goods are originating from you, even though the goods are directly being shipped from the supplier in China. The origin of the goods will always be China, okay, for customs purposes, but your name will be on all the documentation. Okay, it's coming from your organization. You bypass the whole movement of the goods into the warehouse in the United States, which can add anywhere from 20 to as much as 30% of the value in the supply chain, cost value. Demand planning, if we see a tremendous amount of air freight transactions, that's usually a result of bad demand planning because they have to rush shipments from overseas into the United States. So we work on why is the demand planning failing. Alternative and near sourcing, which is a great risk management strategy. The choice of the Incoterm, which has to do with risk and cost, will impact our costing model. The utilization of technology, import and export, and I'm going to talk a little bit about AI towards the end of this presentation. Free trade agreements. We have free trade agreements with 17 countries around the world. South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Mexico, Canada, are just a number of the countries that are in that mix. If we import from those countries, there's no duty being paid. Warehousing, distribution, where we warehouse and distribution from. Comprehensive, robust landed cost modeling, like I showed you with those 5 silos. Robust supply chain assessments, okay? Being able to benchmark your supply chain against like and similar ones. This is where the use of potential consultants provide great value to you because they're familiar with what other companies are doing. And if it's not proprietary, they can bring those benefits into your organization. Trade compliance management is adherence to all the rules and regulations when we import and export. Learning how to navigate those rules can provide significant benefit. The first sale says if we buy something from, an example would be from China, and we have an intermediary between us and the factory, usually called the buying or selling agent. We can distract, and subtract from the value declared to customs their commission or fee. So if we're paying $100 for an item and $15 of it is the fee to the buying agent, we can declare $85 to customs and reduce the amount that we pay by 15%. And lastly is HTS, harmonized tariff numbers, alterations. There are times that you can legitimately change the HTS number for the purpose of getting a better duty rate. In the short term, what can we do with these tariffs coming in? We can move our freight into bonded warehousing. That provides a better benefit than the FTZ, but FTZs do provide some options for us. We can look at that first sale rule that I just mentioned, okay, and we can negotiate with the supplier, the service providers, the carriers, and the customers, where they all share in the higher amount that we have to pay for the goods coming in from overseas. We've created a 4-step process. We look at an intellectual assessment. We turn that into recommendations and a financial model to justify our recommendations. And then we move to an operational model. What do you have to do different to make this this solution work, okay? And then lastly, into implementation, which is making the recommendation happen. Here's an example of where we've done this assessment process and move it into a financial model. This is where we're looking at moving, and this is a real case study, where we're moving a company down in Florida that was involved with computer peripherals, doing about $90 million in business. And what we've done is we've line item the various silos, the acquisition costs, the export charges, the freight, moving it in a 40-foot container or a 40-foot tractor trailer, the duties and the taxes, and the customs clearance process. We line what it costs us for China or Mexico. The acquisition cost in this case was about the same, but the benefits when you reach across each line item is that each transaction we have out of China versus Mexico, out of Mexico, we're saving $19,000, which is pretty significant. If this company, which it did, had 2 shipments a week out of Mexico, as compared to 2 shipments coming out of China, that savings is close to a little over $2 million annually by just switching to another part of the world, in this case where we have a free trade agreement. And this we refer to as a risk management supply chain process. So tariffs have always been among us, and we're very comfortable paying a 4% or a 5% or a 6% duty rate. But when you have all the amount of changes that Trump has put forth, that's created all this chaos and uncertainty. So these are the strategies that we've outlined above that can be of value to you to think about and consider. But for sure, there is a concept of decoupling from China, and we like to use the words reducing your dependence on China because it's an important market. So we don't want to lose it, okay? But we do want to reduce our dependence on it. We make the point of showing patience in reacting, but show aggressiveness in your planning. And Trump, you got to discern between the reality versus the saber rattling and show a high level of patience because we've seen him backpedal and reverse himself pretty dramatically. We think it's good that the China negotiations are now going on because they're really the last country that's been holding out. Over 107 countries are now negotiating a resolution with the Trump administration, and appreciate that there's also significant internal pressure from business leaders all over the country, as well as senators and congressmen, to bring most of this issue to a conclusion. We really believe that the reciprocal tariffs will be resolved by May 20th, and China probably sometime in June. So middle of May and by June with China is what we're predicting. So there are other issues that we need to be thinking about as well, which is the Houthis in Yemen, the war in Ukraine, and the war in Gaza. The Houthis in Yemen, the United States is now actually fighting pretty significantly. Every day, we're sending air bombers into Yemen and taking out the various places where they're firing from. Appreciate the fact from a military standpoint, our satellites can track where the origin of these rockets come from, and we go right back to that source to where we actually attack. So they've made a lot of headway, but it's still blocking off the transportation of vessels through the Suez Canal. The hope there is that the aggressive action of the United States military will change that sometime by the mid to the end of June, where they'll be able to open up ships coming along the coast of Yemen and into the Suez Canal. The war in Ukraine is becoming a real difficult area for negotiation, but the good news is that they're talking and they're going back and forth, both taking position and so forth, that looking for a mutual resolve. The United States was waffling back and forth between Russia and Ukraine, but it appears to be solidly behind Ukraine now, which makes it a little bit more difficult for Russia and more likely that they're going to have to come to the table. The war in Gaza has diminished dramatically, and so we're feeling that that's going to be in our rearview mirror as we move forward. So if you're trading with any of these countries, it obviously is impactful to you. The big concern with both Ukraine and the Houthis is any kind of escalation of that problem, which would bring us into much more of a battle command position, which right now we're more in a reservist position. And the threat to Europe and the US entering the physical fray is always a concern for us, both as individuals and as business people. So, artificial intelligence refers to computer systems capable of performing complex tasks that historically a human could do, such as reasoning, making decisions, or solving problems. Five things that we discovered about AI, and we use AI pretty heavily now in our consulting practice. It improves the computer capabilities of what a computer could do. It creates content and action more efficiently. It replaces many of the human tasks that we put forth previously, assists greatly in problem solving, and it adds intellect into computer processing responsibilities. A lot of the people who work in AI, and I took a seminar in AI so that I understood it better. And the trainer that I had in the room talked about that most of the professionals kind of create the scenario that there are four specific types of AI: reactive, which would be example of spam filters, chatbots, recommendations, and so forth. Theory of the mind is understanding the needs of other intelligent entities. I was actually reading, because I read an AI blog every day, that they really believe that some of the advanced mammals, such as whales, that the AI is allowing us to much greater interpret their signaling, the sounds, the whistling, that they talk between them, and they're starting to be able to decipher that and actually give the information back to the animal and seeing a response. It's pretty exciting when you kind of see that. Limited memory, generative AI, okay, ChatGPT is an example. Self-driving cars, virtual assistants. I have a very good friend who's a client of ours who's a CEO of a company, and he uses a virtual assistant pretty successfully. And it's really the big savings is not having an additional person on the staff, and the software that he uses has a very minimal cost, but it's like having an assistant if you know how to use it very well. And the self-awareness thing has evolved to have human-like intelligence and self-awareness that the computer has in thinking through its solutions and its communications to us. Specifically in international trade and global supply chain, the global reach that AI has. As an example, when we do an export business development search, and we now use the service such as data mine, where we have all this data available on trade all over the world, we stick it into an AI modeling, and it answers very specific questions. You know, what products are being sold to what countries, and who in these countries are buying these products, so that we can very specifically go into those marketplaces. But it's analyzing literally hundreds of millions of strands of data and bringing it down to a one-page conclusion, which allows us to take action on that one page. And analyzing the trade data of all the transactions that occur all over the world. We use this for giving information and steering our clients in particular directions. Communications in various languages. I happened to see a demonstration at a trade show a few weeks ago where a person puts a hearing aid in their ear, and somebody is talking to them in French, and that hearing aid is translating the French conversation into English. And there are, in this case, 99 different languages that he can program into that earpiece, and be able to be in a meeting now with people from foreign countries and be able to clearly understand what they're saying. Replicating human tasks, I think everybody's fully aware of how AI can do that. Finding solutions to complex problems. That's where lots of companies are putting into algorithms into these programs and coming out with actual solutions. I have a son-in-law who's a surgeon, and he uses AI almost every day now in helping him look at a particular operation that he's going to be involved with offering him guidance on things that he needs to take into consideration to improve either the efficiency of the surgery or the outcome of the surgery. Um, and lastly, multitasking on steroids. When you have AI being used, it is like having, a full-time personal assistant right next to you. Specifically in my work, I mentioned the export business development earlier, but we use it very heavily in filtering through the various data banks that we have and coming to conclusions of where we're going to target an export sales project. Documentation validity. In international trade, we all know that there's a tremendous amount of import and export documents that are used. A lot of times there's mistakes on those documents, which can cause problems. So we're now doing some beta testing where we're passing certain clients' documents through an AI validity process so that it corrects the documents before it hits customs or hits the Bureau of Industry and Security in a transaction. And lastly is the thinking is that we now create, again, algorithms in which we put in the nature of a particular problem into the system, and it comes back with multiple solutions for us to use. So it's pretty significant what benefit it would be. So it can all be almost used in any area of global supply chain, seeking efficiencies, analysis, and potential solutions. What I would recommend is to exactly what I did, which was 2 years ago, take a class on AI on business applications. And there are a lot of organizations that give it. If you just Google it, you'll see a lot come up that will do that. It gave me a better idea of what AI was and how I could potentially use it. Now, one of the IT managers on our team is spending about 25% of his time in AI development, which comes right back to all of us in our company and with our clients. And work with your IT personnel in assessing AI applications. They know how to work it, and you just have to pose the problem or the issue you're having, and it's amazing how quickly they come up with these solutions.
Hey, Tom, we do have one question that just came in. Was AI part of what the port unions were negotiating against in the threatening strike?
That's a good question. I don't think that it was specifically AI, though it could have been. It was really technology in general. So if you go to the port of Long Beach in California, which Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach together is our largest gateway, New York, where we live, is secondary. There's a pier that MSC Line operates on, and it's all done electronically, where they normally need 28 longshoremen to load or unload a vessel. Not AI, but technology allows them to load and unload the vessel with four longshoremen. So 24 of them are dismissed on that pier. Obviously, they lose their work because of that. They use laser technology between the equipment that unloads and loads the container, and uses technology which brings up the chassis, brings up the trailers. Freight comes off electronically, freight gets put on electronically, all systematized. The lasers line up the vessel to an exact position along the pier, and then the computers take over the whole process. The four longshoremen that are on that pier are really just observing and to see if there's any problems or something may just not fit exactly, and they get involved. But most of the time, they're just observers, and there in the case of an emergency. So in that case, that is the thing that the longshoremen are concerned about. And good news or bad news is that Trump supports the unions heavily. So he negotiated with them and the port authorities to kind of limit the amount of technology that can be used and the timing of that technology where it could be used more completely and very quickly. They're going to drag it out over a period of time. If you go to the ports of Rotterdam and Singapore now, almost their complete ports are automated now. The reduction in manpower is dramatic in both of those places. They got past it by basically buying the longshoremen out of their contracts and giving them money to live on for the next 20 years of their existence without having to work. And that's probably what's going to eventually happen in the United States as well, because you're not going to be able to stop this technology from taking over these shipping peers and operations. So we expect it to change at some point in time. So this slide here, risk management of the global supply chain is based on the fact that we're trying to get companies not to chase costs as aggressively as they have, particularly people in purchasing and supply chain, where they're constantly trying to negotiate for a better price for the acquisition of goods, for the purposes of any services that they have, whether it's freight or warehousing or distribution or fulfillment. But change the mindset to where you're not chasing so much cost, but what you're chasing is the getting the best value for your spend. And it's a very cultural difference where if you think that way, obtaining the best value for your spend, you're now integrating risk management in the supply chain, recognizing that certain things might cost you more, but prove significantly beneficial in the long run because it reduces risk for the company going forward. The best example of that is safety stock, right? You want to run a lean inventory program, but look at where we've been in the last 5, 6 years, where safety stock was threatened so dramatically. So we had advised our clients when Trump became president that they should increase by February, March of 2025 their safety stocks up to 200% levels, right? A lot of those companies did exactly what we recommended, and they're in a pretty safe and secure position now because they're fully laden with product, okay? Versus companies that run very lean systems, are in a much more dramatic problem. So risk management, the idea is obtaining best value for your spend and changing the culture to better understand and evaluate risk. Um, when we help companies build their supply chain management teams, we specifically look at how they create the job descriptions and the deployment of their supply chain people. And they've got to build into those agreements and understandings that risk management is an integral part of supply chain, and that you have to look at your risk cost analysis. And many times to mitigate risk, okay, sometimes the cost will go up to be able to do that, but you get that benefit. What if something happens? So with that, we'll take any more questions or comments and conclude it. I appreciate everybody's kind attention, and I've done that with a minute to spare, so that's pretty good.
Did great job. Great job. Let me see if there's any more questions in the chat. Actually, no, just thank you from Evan. But if anybody has a question, please let us know, or you can always respond to my email and I'll get the question over to Tom if you think about it after we conclude the program. Tom, I want to thank you again. Thank our audience for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great day. And we will be posting this recording sometime today and sending it out to everybody. Thanks again, everybody.